Tekhelet is a color, a blue string that we're told in the Torah, v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf b'til Tekhelet. The Jews should put on the corner of their four-cornered garments a blue thread. But what is this Tekhelet? Where does it come from? Look behind me. We're at the Kotel in the old city of Jerusalem. We see many different types of people, old and young, small and big, wearing all sorts of different types of talitot. Also different shapes, different sizes. But very few of them actually wear the blue thread. What is this blue thread? Where did it go? I'm Ari. I'd like you to join me and 3 of my friends in an awesome expedition in search of Tekhelet.
The search for Tekhelet will take us on an exciting journey. We will try to find the link between a snail, a plant, a coin, and a ball of wool. We will witness the process of spinning wool into thread and knotting tzitziot. We will meet fascinating people, past and present, and be exposed to ancient ways and modern science. We will move through the desert, walk the streets of Jerusalem, dive in the Mediterranean Sea, visit a chemistry lab, and dig in an archaeological excavation, all in search of parts of this puzzle called Tekhelet. In the end, we will rediscover for ourselves the mitzvah of B'til Tekhelet, lost some 1,300 years ago.
What we have to keep in mind is that in ancient times, they didn't have all of the colors that we now have, the yellows and reds and greens. Everybody wore a kind of combed wool, like this talit, raw wool. It was a beige or a brown or a gray. So when the Jews would wear this blue, bright blue thread on their clothes, it would stand out immediately, and people would immediately look at them and say, oh, that's different. Also keep in mind that who wore blue in ancient times? It was the kings. We see in the Megillah, Mordechai came out from before the king wearing Tekhelet, wore royal clothes. He wore royal clothes when he left the king. Tekhelet. That's what he wore. The blues and the purples, that's what the kings and the priests wore. You have a manuscript here, a medieval manuscript, where you can see there's a picture of King Solomon, a picture of Aaron the priest, and both of them are wearing the Tekhelet and the Argaman. Both of them are wearing the blues. And that's exactly what the Tekhelet would connote. The ideas and the imagery that would be brought up when a person would look at these strings. He would remember, I'm not a peasant farmer. And no matter what his station in life, he would realize and he would hold his head up high and remember, I am a priest, I am a king, I am a prince.
Our first clue as to what the Tekhelet color is made of comes from the Talmud. Our sources tell us that the dye is derived from a snail, in Hebrew called a chilazon, found in the waters of the Mediterranean. The snail is similar to the sea, and its form is similar to a fish, and it comes up once in 70 years. Therefore, it is expensive. We need all our powers of deduction and imagination to understand from this what the chilazon is. Similar to the sea. In its color, it must resemble the water of the sea, or, for that matter, the seabed. It is similar to a fish. It is a live animal. From this, we must deduce that Tekhelet can only be made from an animal. No plant will do to fulfill the commandment of Tzitzit. It comes up once in 70 years. Therefore, it is expensive. This is a little more complicated, but the exaggerated metaphor is the sage's way of emphasizing the great expense.
Come, let's go meet Professor Felix, the world expert in biblical plants and animals. Let's hear what he has to say about Tekhelet.
It was our dream to have an entire talit made with Tekhelet. Fathers passed down their tzitziot, the talitot, throughout the generations. It was so expensive, that is why they used the Tekhelet in a very limited way.
We know today that it takes many snails to make one set of tzitzit. Our sages told us, often in metaphors, that the Tekhelet was made from the snail. But which snail? Excavations at Hof Dor, known as the ancient city of Dora, shed light on our own search for Tekhelet. At At many archaeological sites along the Mediterranean coast, in what was Phoenicia some 3,000 years ago, there is much evidence pointing to the use of the Murex seashell in the dyeing industry. Ancient coins from Tyre show the Trunculus as the symbol of this dye-producing city. Mounds of shells and vats with color stains indicate that these are the remnants of the dibromo indigo extracted from the Murex. This purple color is the royal purple, known in Hebrew as argaman.
This site is very interesting because it's located on the coast, and in the Israelite period and in the Persian period it was a Phoenician city. It had a very interesting harbor. We are just now looking towards the south harbor of the Israelite period. And we also have here in this area, very close to the harbor, we have this purple dye installation which is so unique to find.
By deep-sea diving off the same coast today, we can reenact the Murex family of seashells.
We dive off the Mediterranean coast to try and collect the Murex Trunculus seashell. On one of our expeditions, we took along Nobel Prize-winning chemist Raoul Hoffman. What's going on?
Quite incredible. Look at the color in them. Just think they look like part of the sea, but they're green like the sea, and purple. It's so nice to hold them in my hands. The first time I've seen these. I've never seen them before. We're going to repeat the process of how they did it 3,000-4,000 years ago, but not only that, but
the Trunculus, inside you have like the kind of worm, the snail inside the shell. Right about here, on the back of the worm, there's what they call the hypobranchial gland.
Right.
That's where the dye is stored, and that's what we're
Right.
going to get to. So we're going to try to break that open now.
now you break it right at that point.
Right at that point. And here you can see, there it is. You see that? This whole yellowish gland. That's what we need. That's where the dye is stored.
Okay. Just that yellowish gland there.
That's it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we'll
Okay.
take this off. Now inside the gland, there's this kind of a clear liquid, which when exposed to air, and the enzymes that are also in the gland, will change the clear precursors of the dye into the dye itself, and you'll see this getting reddish, purplish blue in a few seconds.
Does it need the sunlight too?
Some of the literature says it does, some of it says it doesn't. So I don't know the answer to that question. Here, we'll just do it again.
That's all. That's the whole gland. That little thing. Not the yellow part, but just that little
Right.
thing
So
up
do it
top.
again. Here, just do another one.
Okay.
Can you see?
Yeah. Oh,
There you
that's
see the
beautiful.
gland.
Now I see very clearly the gland.
You
So.
see that? This whole area here.
Well, I might as well try to cut it out. Why
There you
not?
go.
Just this gland.
That
over
whole
here.
thing.
Just the little dark part.
Right, exactly right. That whole thing.
No,
Now you
got
got
some
it.
of the yellow.
That's good.
Yeah.
You just put it right down.
Now I need to get my finger. Nothing's gonna happen.
No, just your fingers will turn blue.
Finger will turn blue. There it is. That's the gland.
Right.
That part.
Now you can already see,
Yeah,
in a
this
few
one's gonna-
seconds, this is already turning.
You can't eat this?
People all along the Mediterranean eat them, and we've asked that they give the remainders of these snails to the poor people in Jerez to eat. Also, I've just read recently that derivatives of these chemicals are used in leukemia research.
All the remains at the archaeological sites, and in the seashells as well, show us a purple color, the argaman, known in chemical terms as dibromo indigo. But what of the Tekhelet, the blue color mentioned in our sources? Our journey takes us to the chemistry lab, where we will learn for ourselves what the ancient dyers knew long before us.
Any time they've ever found any sort of archaeological dye, the archaeological sites, the pots that they found there, and we've done analysis on this stuff, it's always been only dibromo indigo. This was the big problem everyone felt, all the scientists, the historians felt that this snail was it. But what? But it's purple, it's not blue. Till about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, somebody was doing this in a lab in Tel Aviv, and he put the chemicals in, and he put the dye in, and he needed a coffee. So before he put the wool in, he took this pot and he put it on the windowsill. And it sat on the windowsill for 10 or 15 minutes, and the sun hit it. And he didn't realize it, but what happened? The sun broke the bonds of the bromine atoms. Once the bromine atoms disappear, what are we left with? Not dibromo indigo, indigo. Indigo is a blue color. Indigo is the color of blue jeans. Levi's blue jeans were traditionally made with indigo. So now what happens is, you put your chemicals and dye in. You let the sun hit it for a few minutes. You then put your wool in. You're not putting your wool into a solution of purple dibromo indigo. You're putting your wool into a solution of blue indigo. You cook it, and when it comes out, you have this beautiful blue.
To see the Tekhelet chemistry is something entirely new. The actual chemistry is something we only learned this century. It's good to see that knowledge rediscovered. It's a chemistry that came from people and should be returned to the people.
There are three clues which will help us identify the true Tekhelet. The first is that it has to come from a sea creature. As the Tosefta says, Tekhelet min achilazon kasher. It has to come from a snail, from a conch, from a chilazon. And that we've already seen. The second criterion is that Tekhelet has to be a steadfast dye. It has to be fast within the wool and not fade. She'omedet biyofyo, says the Rambam.
According to Jewish tradition and Jewish law, the dyeing of wool with as Tekhelet has to be a permanent dye which does not fade. It does not fade when it's laundered again and again. It does not fade when it hangs in the sun, exposed to the sun, and it doesn't fade due to rubbing and in its use as a textile. We have found that the dye stuff, which is based on a ring system of the indigo, this is the chemical basis of the Tekhelet dye produced by the Trunculus shellfish. And we can certainly say that regarding the ancient world, it was the most permanent and stable dye stuff that they could ever find.
There are lots of things which stain something colored. I mean, even if we eat some berry or something. But the trick in making a good dye is it has to be fast. It has to. No one's going to buy a shirt that's going to wash out the dye in one day, in one wash. So this is now fixed into the fabric of the wool.
Third criterion, which we know from the Gemara, is that it has to be identical to a counterfeit Tekhelet, a counterfeit dye, which was rampant in the times of the Gemara, and that was called kala ilan, or indigo. It came from a plant source, from the woad plant or the istis source.
This plant, which can produce the indigo dye, another plant known as the indigofera species from India was most probably the kala ilan or kela ilan of the Talmud. The plant and the dye that the Talmud warned against using because it was very difficult to distinguish between kala ilan and real Tekhelet. However, in today's world, with a liquid chromatograph that we have seen earlier, one can definitely distinguish between an indigo that is plant-derived from indigo that is animal-derived, because in the animal-derived indigo, that is the snail-produced indigo, one can also see dibromo indigo, which can only come from a snail and not from a plant.
Now we know that Medrash in Baba Metzia that says only God can distinguish between them. Why? Because they're absolutely identical. So of course you can't distinguish between them.
The search for Tekhelet for Tzitzit brings together two ancient crafts and industries. We have already seen the dyeing process reenacted. Let's look at the ancient textile industry, the spinning of wool into thread to be woven into fabric for clothing and other uses. Tzitziot are made of wool. The process of making them reminds us of the process used in the desert by our ancestors in building the Mishkan. The rabbis of the Mishnah organized the concept of work that one rests from on Shabbat into 39 major categories called the 39 Avot Melacha. These categories were used in the building of the Mishkan. The loom is used for weaving the thread into fabric, but for tzitzit, the spinning wheel is where
If I
it
was
all
spinning tzitziot, I would have the proper intentions in my head, and I would also say LearnMitzvot tzitzit before spinning.
We're about to start the process of shazirah. Shazirah is the process that twists together the finely spun threads to create the large, thick thread that we actually use to make tzitzit. This machine here allows us to actually do the process of shazirah, winding together. It's all going to be done by hand, and what happens is we have the wheel here. As the wheel turns, can you see how these threads start to turn? Okay. What's going to happen is that he'll be turning this thread. It's all done LearnMitzvot tzitzit. And this is the final chut tzitzit, and this is the same process that's used for white as well as for blue.
I'm here now with Rav Eliyahu Tevger, one of the founders of our Amuta and the person who taught us all that we know about the Tekhelet, who is going to help us do the tying of the tzitzit. Before placing the strings into the tzitzit in the corner, one must say LearnMitzvot tzitzit. When we tie with the white, we are remembering the way that we tied with the Tekhelet. When we tie with the Tekhelet, there are many different ways in which one can tie, based on different Talmudic passages which were understood by the Gaonim, by the sages, and by the Rishonim, people such as the greats as Maimonides and Rashi.
If Tekhelet was so important to Am Yisrael, so important that 3 times a day in the Shema, the Jews say the word Tekhelet and ask that we have Tekhelet on our garments, how could it be that it was forgotten? And that brings us to the Roman Cardo, the ancient Roman street in the middle of the old city. And truthfully, it was the Romans that started the demise of Tekhelet. First of all, the year 70, the temple was destroyed, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, and finally Eretz Israel was decimated. And that meant the Jews were exiled. Where were they exiled to? They were exiled to Babylon. In Babylon, they didn't have access to the Mediterranean. They didn't have access to the snails that create Tekhelet. Secondly, by the year 380 or so, the Romans declared that anybody wearing these expensive garments, other than Caesar himself and some of the generals, should be put to death. Thirdly, the tremendous expense of these garments made it impossible for an impoverished Jewish community to afford them. And finally, the Arab conquest of the entire Middle East put an end to this ancient craft of dyeing with Tekhelet. Our story begins in the 1880s, when the Radziner Rebbe decided that the Messiah couldn't come until we had Tekhelet. So he studied all the sources, and he made a trek to Italy, to the Mediterranean, and he went into the ocean, and he said, I found it. What did he find? He found a squid. It took him a long time, and finally was able to produce some sort of a blue dye. Many of his Hasidim wore it, but it generally wasn't accepted by the religious population of Europe at the time. Came along Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog was the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, and he wrote his doctoral thesis on Tekhelet. Rav Herzog studied the Radziner as well as all the secular, religious, and chemical, and historical, and archaeological sources, and he was able to look at the Radziner dye and disprove it for many reasons. The bottom line was Rav Herzog was convinced that it had to come from a mollusk, and in the majority of his research he found there was only one snail that it could be, and that was the Murex Trunculus. And after 80 years of research since Rav Herzog, with chemical advances and historical and archaeological research, a person by the name of Rabbi Eliyahu Tevger went to the ocean 7 or 8 years ago, found the snail, studied the sources, went to the Chemical Institute, learned how to dye, and 3 of us joined him at the ocean one day, collected some snails, and started producing the Tekhelet. And that's how Untitled Chapter was formed, the Untitled Chapter organization.
Here we saw the opportunity to actually bring back a commandment in the Torah, bring back a mitzvah in the Torah that has been lost for 1,300 years. And I think since that day on the beach, the 4 of us, we all decided that this is the opportunity to actually take something that God commanded the Jews on Mount Sinai, that's been lost for 1,300 years, and to bring it back to the Jewish people.
Color is an emotional experience. Tekhelet is the emotional reminder of the bond between ourselves and Hashem, and how we wish to get closer to Hashem with Ahavat Hashem, the love of Hashem, the love of Torah and mitzvot.
Our journey's taken us on a trek of thousands of miles. We've been on the mountains, we've been in the water, we've been in the chem labs. But what's it all about? Is it all about just making a color from a snail that's found in the Mediterranean? Really not. Tekhelet is a world in and of itself, and much more than just a blue thread. So the next time you read the Shema or kiss your tzitzit, hopefully it's going to make a little bit of a difference. Why is that? Because the blue of Tekhelet brings you to think about the ocean, and the depth of the ocean